He promised her forever, but forever ended the moment gold touched his hands. In a quiet town where loyalty was everything, one woman's love became her curse, and her husband's greed became his noose. What began as a marriage built on dreams turned into a battlefield of betrayal, deceit, and unthinkable revenge. By the time it was over, he wasn't just begging for forgiveness. He was begging for his life. Stay with us till the end of this story, because what you're about to hear will make you question love, power, and the price of trust itself. Before we begin, if you believe that truth always finds its way back, no matter how deeply buried, subscribe to our channel for more real stories that reveal the darkest sides of human hearts. They married under a low wooden arch that smelled of summer rain and flower. Two people promising safety to one another in a town where safety was a rumor. Her name was Eleanor Hale. Steady hands, a laugh that could steady a room, and an instinct for keeping small, sacred things. A ledger, a baby's blanket, the exact weight of coin that would keep them both fed through winter. His name was Thomas Ashby, quick smile, patient with the plow, restless when the horizon hinted at something larger. Together they built a modest life from sweat and thrift, a house with a single cracked pane that caught the sunrise like a confession. Most days, it was enough. But the town was changing. Men came home with new words in their mouths. Claim, assay, strike, and the coffeehouse talk turned sharp and metallic, like coins in a thief's palm. News arrived on thin paper. An outcrop 2 ridges over had yielded not flecks, but seams. The kind of seam that made men forget the look on their children's faces. The kind of seam that made a man who'd promised forever begin to measure forever in ounces. At first, Thomas resisted. He tended to the garden, repaired the fence, hummed in the evenings while Eleanor stitched. Yet there was a restlessness in him that Eleanor had seen once before, the same restlessness that made him leave for a day's work and return with eyes that had seen beyond the next hill. He spoke less about the future and more about calculations. How many hours of labor equaled the price of a new stove? How many coin could buy the town's respect? When a smooth-talking agent from the city, Mr. Hale, no relation, ironic fate, arrived with a ledger and a promise written in ink that shone like opportunity, Thomas listened. He listened while Eleanor watched the change, a tremor in his jaw when he refused her supper, a longing in his voice when he read brochures with pictures of stacked gold. Eleanor told herself not to fear. She knew men like Thomas. They were built of habit more than hunger. But the lure was relentless. There were partnerships to be had, shares to buy, claims to validate with signatures. One night, she caught him at the table long after the lamp had guttered. He was studying diagrams and contract, hands stained with coal or worry. He spoke of a syndicate, of front money, of a backer who would double a man's fortune before the spring thaw. He said the words that make a boring life glitter: security, legacy, comfort for their 2 small children. He even framed it as sacrifice, something noble. And Eleanor, trusting the soft honesty in his brown eyes, allowed herself to believe him. The betrayal did not arrive all at once. It was a series of small omissions, a ledger entry made with a different pen, a check cashed in town without a receipt. Eleanor learned patience the hard way. She waited for Thomas to come clean, to bring the accounts to the one place she trusted more than his promises, her ledger. When he offered her coin and an awkward, breathless apology for staying late, she kept quiet. There is a kind of terror in knowing a man you have given your life to is learning to love something else. Eleanor felt that terror as a cold swimming pool under her ribs. Then the town began to whisper of the claim that had changed everything. Men who once nodded politely now crossed to the other side of the street when Thomas passed. A local blacksmith, who had always drunk with Thomas at the tavern, spat in the dirt and muttered the word collusion. Eleanor endured the eyes, the silence, and the steady erosion of the life she thought she knew. She folded the children's clothes with hands that trembled, and once, when she thought no one could see, she took Thomas's coat from the peg and felt the inner pocket where he kept his receipts. Her fingers closed on paper that did not belong to the family, a folded page with names and sums and a seal she did not recognize. The ink had bled where someone had wiped sweat from their face. The handwriting was angular, like the hand of a man who had learned to negotiate with wolves. She confronted him in the small hours, not with the fury she imagined, but with the weary directness of someone who has catalogued every loss. "What did you sign?" she asked. Thomas looked like a man caught mid-step on a cliff. He tried to explain with the clumsy logic of a gambler, risk now, reward later, but Eleanor saw beyond the words. She went into his coat again, into the hidden seam where he kept what a man hides when ashamed. There was a note, folded too many times. Transfer complete. Final payment received. Blackwell and Company. Beneath it in his own hurried hand, "Forgive me. For us." The room spun, not with the physical sensation of falling, but with the sudden, vertiginous knowledge that someone had sold the house they'd fought for, or the claim they'd worked beside neighbors to protect, or perhaps something more tender, the promise that had once been their pact. Eleanor felt not just betrayal, but an exposure, as if a warm lamp had burnt out and left her naked in the cold. She thought of the children's breakfast, of the neighbor's dog that waited for their scraps, of the small altar of mended thread on her sewing table. Her mind catalogued the immediate practicalities, while her heart catalogued the moral ones. Who else had been complicit? How deep did this flow of gold run? As she pushed the paper back into the seam and closed the coat, a knock came at the door. Not the polite knock of a friend, nor the hurried knock of a tradesman. It was 3 slow raps, measured as if by the heel of a boot. Eleanor opened the door with her hands still cold around the fabric of betrayal. 2 men stood on the stoop, one in the drab uniform of the town constable, the other in a coat that smelled faintly of tobacco and power. The constable held his hat in his hands, the rope of a warrant peeking from his breast pocket like a hidden confession. "Mrs. Ashby," he said, "we need to speak about your husband." In that instant, the ledger in Eleanor's head rearranged itself into a new, terrifying pattern. The man she had loved might have bargained away their future for promise and glitter, but more dangerous than the loss of coin was the sudden realization that his acts might drag the entire family into something darker, something that would not be settled with the folding of a ledger. The constable's eyes, flat and unwilling, did not look like the eyes of a man coming to borrow a cup of sugar. Eleanor closed the door on her hands, shaking, the note still warm in her palm where she had tucked it. Outside, someone laughed too loudly in the street. Inside, the children slept a world away. She had expected anger, perhaps, or tears. Instead, a quiet, stunned clarity settled. Thomas's betrayal was not a private failing, but the first tremor of an unfolding storm. And then, as the sound of voices crept closer, she realized the name on Blackwell's seal was only the beginning. There were other names, darker and older, written beneath the ink. The day after, the constable's knock moved through the house like a shutter slammed too hard. The town felt smaller. People avoided the Ashbys as if contagion could pass from one porch to another. Eleanor met silence at every corner. The butcher's nod clipped short, the schoolteacher's smile gone thin. Her mind, which had once been a ledger of groceries and school lessons, now tabulated accusations and possibilities. Who knew? Who profited? How quickly could a life be stripped if one document bore a different ink? The constable returned at dawn with a warrant more formal than the man himself. Thomas was taken to the town hall under a sky that refused to pity him. Eleanor watched him go, his shoulders not yet bowed. The gait of a man who still thought an explanation might right the world. Neighbors watched too, some with pity, others with the rough satisfaction of people who like stories to end simply. But Eleanor had learned that nothing about this would be simple. At the magistrate's table, the papers were crisp, official seeming, stamped in a way that made them look final. Blackwell and Company had not only purchased claims, the magistrate explained, but had paid for protection and mercantile favors that now implicated a network of town officials and businessmen. Thomas was accused of facilitating transfers and falsifying signatures. The word falsified landed like a bell. It suggested not a man who'd grown greedy overnight, but a man who had been taught to imitate ink until forgery looked like honesty. When Eleanor demanded to see the documents, an attendant produced a copy with her own seal. Her name, beneath a transfer dated 3 weeks earlier. Her breath caught so sharply, she thought she would not find the next word. The signature was hers, down to the slight slant she had when signing for the grocer, but the date and the amounts were foreign, extravagant, and stamped with the same Blackwell wax that had burned her husband's secret. She remembered signing a mundane receipt for seed and the council's registry months ago. She did not remember giving permission to move land or claim or coin. The handwriting looked like hers, and yet, if it was indeed forged, the forgery had been done with a patience that hurt. Thomas, when she confronted him in the small visiting room, looked like a man who had been washed and put back in his place. He spoke slowly, choosing words as if plucking them from a ledger. "I thought I could buy back control," he said. "Mr. Blackwell said he would fund our claim, pay off the town debts. He promised a share. I signed papers on behalf of us because he said it would speed things. I thought." His voice broke, and he looked at his hands, the same hands that had lifted a plow, fed the children, repaired the back stair. "I thought I could handle it." "Handle it?" Eleanor's voice was a cold, astonished measurement. "You put my name on papers that sold what we built. You told me it was for a stove and for winter. You put us beneath someone who wears a seal and calls it friendship." The room was full of tiny, precise anger, the kind that needs no theatrics. Thomas tried to take her hand and she flinched, as if that touch might smudge an accusation into truth. Outside, murmurs grew into a pattern. Blackwell and Company was not simply a distant investor. It was a prism. Through it bent the town's debts, its favors, its cosigns. Men who had once traded curtsy for coin now circled the issue like carrion birds. Old alliances revealed new motivations. The blacksmith, the innkeeper, even the preacher had names attached to sums. Blackwell's ledger read like a map of moral compromise. Eleanor's stomach turned at the idea that their small moral failings, a loan here, a whispered agreement there, had been catalogued and purchased. That night a man arrived with a carriage the color of bad weather. He did not wear the town's cloth. The cut of his coat was foreign, his boots polished like promises. The constable, who'd been stolid and by the book, suddenly became deferential. The man handed a document to the magistrate, a short certificate of corporate custody. Blackwell and Company demanded the man named Thomas Ashby be held for questioning as part of an internal audit. The language was careful. Its implication was lethal. The constable read it and then, with a posture that had once been authority, he led Thomas out. Chains were neither large nor theatrical as in some storybook. They were practical, cold links meant to keep feet from wandering where paper suggested they might. Eleanor ran after them, the hem of her skirt catching at splinters of the porch. "This is my house," she called. "These papers." But the constable's shoulders cut through her. The carriage door closed. Thomas looked at her across a sea of townsfolk and painlessly mouthed, "Forgive me." He still had the small, private look of a man who believed some act could be fixed if you simply looked at it long enough. When the carriage had gone and the town resumed its pedestrian business, Eleanor retreated to the pantry and found the coat again. In the inner seam where she had first found Blackwell's note, there was a new paper, clenched, as though it had been read and then hidden in haste. Her hands shook when she unfolded it. It was not a confession, not a plea. It was a list, names and percentages, columns of allocation that made the stomach of any accountant jealous. At the bottom, in Thomas's hurried hand, someone had scrawled a single word and a name. "If they come, trust this, Eleanor Hale." She read it twice, looking for the trick, for the small print. Her name stared back. Beneath her name, a line had been drawn in black ink. "Guardian of Ledger until cleared." Her heart did something that was not a physical ache so much as a shift in gravity. Had Thomas named her as a protector, or had he, in panic, implicated her deeper? Had he believed that by putting her name on paper he could anchor her to safety, or had he made her the next target? The house seemed suddenly too full of listening things. Outside, someone laughed, that brittle laugh of a man trying to be braver than he was. Eleanor folded the paper carefully, like a prayer or an accusation, and hid it in the place she kept the account of births and deaths, the book that had always been hers. She did not yet know whether his last scribble was a salvation or a trap. She only knew that when men in city coats drew networks across their town like a chessboard, ordinary people were the pieces, and that the next move would be lethal. The chamber the magistrate called for the hearing smelled of boiled coffee and old paper, the too honest sense of a town that kept its secrets in desk drawers. Word had spread. Blackwell and Company would be in the dock. The city man who'd come like a cloud and left ruin in his wake. People packed the benches with the kind of curiosity that is never purely idle. They wanted to see whether the town they thought they knew could be bought and then return. Eleanor sat near the back with the book she had always kept, her ledger, and the folded lists Thomas had hidden in his coat. Her fingers counted the pages like a litany. Receipts, household entries, the tiny proofs of a life lived honestly. They would be her witness. The first testimony came from the town clerk, a woman who had been a child when Eleanor had first moved into the lane. She spoke slowly, with the deliberation of someone who had watched a community erode. She remembered paper stock, a particular press mark that Blackwell's agents used. She remembered a visiting notary who always wanted the candle left to burn low, who always lent the magistrate's pen. The clerk's voice trembled when she said the word forgery. She handed a sheet forward, and the magistrate peered until his face collapsed into the same mixture of pity and anger the rest of them felt. The expert from the county seat, a man with a dour look and ink-stained fingers, demonstrated the differences between the genuine registry and the copies that had been used to smooth the corporate path. The ink, the watermark, the slant, all betrayed the pretense. Blackwell sat silent, the kind of silence reserved for men who believe station shields them. He had lawyers who argued in smooth phrases about investments and commerce. The town heard instead how easy it was to buy favors with coin, and how common men had been convinced to offer their signatures like prayers. Thomas's role was untangled next. Not simply a man who slipped when greed took him, but a man who had been courted, pressured, made to believe his name on a paper could buy his family a future. Evidence showed his signatures on a string of transfers. Testimony showed promises whispered at the tavern, threats delivered with the polite smile of a capitalist. There were no clean absolutes. When the constable brought Thomas in, shackles cold and economical across his wrists, the room shifted. People who had been on both sides of the argument watched their old neighbor enter not as the man who had mended their fence, but as a figure of consequence. The sight tightened Eleanor's chest in a way that made breathing a small, deliberate task. Thomas's eyes found hers, as they always had. First, for forgiveness, then for understanding. He mouthed a single word, "for us." It landed like a stone. Eleanor could have denounced him and walked away, taken the path of a woman enraged and scorned, allowed the town's need for a simple tale to swallow the complexities. Yet she had not come with vengeance as a plan. She had come with the ledger because truth, however painful, would be better than a lie that kept Blackwell free. She rose and presented what she had: the original receipts that matched her pen's curl, the stack of accounts that proved the dates had been altered, the note where Thomas had, in panic, scribbled, "If they come, trust this, Eleanor Hale." She read, not to shame, but to lay bare what had been done: the coercion, the bargains, the cowardice, and the bravery braided together. The magistrate read the evidence aloud. The town heard Blackwell's network unravel in syllables. Men who had moved like shadows were named. The law, however blunt in its instruments, began to bite. Blackwell and company would be held to account. The city man's promises of investment were exposed as a net for small towns. For Thomas, the law had no mercy for a signature that had been forged in his hand, no allowance that fear can act like a currency. He would be tried and sentenced for what he had done. When the sentence was handed down, a term that would hang over Thomas like an iron bell, he was not the only one who understood the punishment. Eleanor stood as he was brought before her, shackles clinking like a small, steady rain. Their eyes met, and for a moment, there were no witnesses but two people who had once promised forever. He looked at her as a man might look at a ledger, searching for where the entry could be amended, for the trick that would balance the columns. She looked at him as a woman who had counted every coin of tenderness and found it diminished. Then the twist that would haunt the town came not from the magistrate, but from the quiet pocket of Thomas's coat. Eleanor had brushed it earlier in desperation and thought it empty. Now, with the courtroom full and the sentence decided, she unfolded a scrap of paper that fell down his sleeve, a map, crude, penciled, of the hills outside town. marked with an X and a note in Thomas's cramped hand. Underneath, in a line that blurred as if written through tears, he had written, "I hid the last of it. I could not leave you bare. Take it, if you must." The paper trembled in her fingers like a thing alive. Nobody at the bench had counted on the smallness of a man's last, private tenderness. It changed nothing about the law. It altered everything about Eleanor's choice. She pressed the paper into her ledger, and before the room, walked to where Thomas sat, chains rasping. She did not speak words of accusation or absolution. Instead, she put her hand on his gloved one, not in mercy alone, nor in pardon, but in the complex human calculus of survival and consequence. He closed his eyes as if relieved to be held and punished at once. When the doors closed behind Thomas and the lawyers and the city men, the town steadied on a new axis. Blackwell would be tried. The complicit would be seen. The ledger would be read in public and private. But Eleanor carried home a different weight, the knowledge that justice and love are often unequal measures, that to salvage a community, one might be required to sacrifice a life once held dear. The lesson she left carved into the bones of the town was simple and merciless. That loyalty is not the opposite of accountability. That sometimes the only way to break a chain of corruption is to let the nearest chain fall first. If you value truth over the comfort of comforting lies, prepare to pay a cost. If this story touched you, if you believe complicated truth is better than easy comfort, subscribe to our channel for more real stories that peel back the layers of history, one painful human choice at a time.